Welcome to Legal AF MTN, a new pro-democracy channel at the intersection of law and politics in collaboration with the Midas Touch Network. You know what to do. Free subscribe. Hit that oval subscribe button and help us get to 200,000 subscribers before Halloween. And if you do, you'll enjoy new content like you're about to see here. I got a great announcement. We've been teasing it all week. We've got joining forces with Legal AF MTN. We got Court Accountability Action, and its two leaders, founder Alex Aronson, Lisa Graves of Grave and Justice, another great podcast. And they're going to be regular contributors together, apart, with me, without me, right here on Legal AF to talk about the things that matter to them, and more importantly, things that they are up to their neck in terms of accountability of our federal courts, the hijacking of our federal courts by the Federalist Society before our very eyes in broad daylight, but more importantly, what we as patriots and as citizens can do about it once we identify the problem. Now let's identify a new problem, turning it over to Alex to talk about yet another scandal. Don't change the dial. It's not the same old hot take. It's another hot take about Sam Alito embroiled in yet another scandal before the term has even opened on the first Monday of October. We've got, yes, it must be a day of the week, so it must be an Alito scandal. Turning it over to you, Alex.
MAGA flag Sam. It's great to be with you, Michael. Alex Aronson here from Court Accountability Action. I think that introduction's, really apt because, what we're seeing, and, we work on dark money judicial influence issues, looking at the Federalist Society scheme to capture and weaponize the court to drive the MAGA agenda, is this real intersection of interests and players between the MAGA movement, these right-wing special interests, and increasingly theocratic bent to the right-wing movement. You're seeing that in J.D. Vance and the sort of Theo bros that have emerged behind him. But wanted to sort of dig into that intersection, a little deeper dive here on some explosive stories that came out of The Intercept this week from Sean Musgrave, two back-to-back stories, one day after the other. The first story was about Mark Martin, a former Supreme Court justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court, who went off to be a law school dean, and then a couple of years later became the founding dean of another law school down in North Carolina. And, he's been connected at various points to the legal insurrection, the so-called Stop the Steal movement that we know Ginny Thomas was a part of, that was sort of led by John Eastman and Jeff Clark at the Justice Department, this last minute effort to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And that really helped lead to the violent insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. But Martin has gone pretty well under the radar. The Intercept and Sean Musgrave have done an amazing job of uncovering just the extent of which this guy was involved in the legal strategy to try to bring this stuff to the Supreme Court, to try to overturn the 2020 election for Trump. Lisa, I was hoping, my partner, Lisa Graves, co-founder of Court Accountability, managing director of our research arm, True North Research, an intrepid researcher, one of the real reasons that we know so much about Leonard Leo, and going back years before that about Charles Koch and his financial influence on our politics. Lisa, could you tell us more about Mark Martin and what we learned this week about his involvement in the Stop the Steal effort?
Yes. Thank you so much, Alex. Sean did such a fantastic job on that story. I read the two-parter at least 3 times because there were so many details about part of the January 6th story that most Americans don't know. In fact, very few people knew, and The Intercept really dug it out. And what they showed was, while John Eastman has become much more famous or infamous for his role in trying to subvert the 2020 presidential election, he had the help of a former state Supreme Court justice, Mark Martin, in doing so. And that credential of being a former state justice, I think, was deployed to really give him additional authority to be making his claims, which were, can I say, bullshit AF?
In fact, if you don't, I may not have you come back on the network.
All right, they were bullshit AF. This was it turns out the Intercept documents how it's Mark Martin who really helped push this notion that a vice president has, quote, plenary power to overturn the election in the ministerial role that the vice president plays in in making sure that the ballots are counted, electoral college ballots are counted. So you have this guy who was really operating behind the scenes, and it wasn't just that he was like in the outer circle or kind of subservient to John Eastman. He is one of the guys who Donald Trump called on January 6th about, who knows what about. In part, we don't know fully because in the midst of the, array of characters that the January 6th committee in Congress thoroughly investigated, Martin was someone who did not get the type of examination that I think some people thought was warranted, or may have thought needed to be looked into more. But again, like Jenny Thomas, Mark Martin is someone who I think deserves much more scrutiny for what actually happened versus what they say happened or what they've deflected. In the case of Mark Martin, who has not been charged with any crimes, who is not named in the January 6th committee's report, what The Intercept have done is show that he should be, that he was instrumentally involved in that effort to subvert our democracy, and that his efforts to advise Trump, to push Trump, and to push his inner circle didn't just affect what was happening in the White House. It also affected what was happening in the states with these illegitimate fake electors that were being pushed. And so it was Mark Martin's theories that made their way to Mark Fincham, the infamous state rep in Arizona, who was involved in part of this. It was one of the people who was targeted for this fake elector scheme. And as you know, Alex, it's not just like a theoretical fake elector scheme. It's a scheme in which there have been criminal consequences for some of the people involved who actually had the audacity to basically say that they were the legitimate electors to cast the ballots for the president of the United States when they were illegitimate. And that those criminal investigations, for example, in Arizona and other places, again, Martin's not named, but he was the instigator of some of that agenda. And so was Jenny Thomas. So was this sort of right-wing cast of characters that had Trump's ear or Mark Meadows' ear. And what they were trying to do was trying to create confusion, trying to create a way for Pence to not actually certify Joe Biden as a legitimate president elected by the people of the United States. And so the first part of that blockbuster was just that there was a person who was so powerful behind the scenes that many people did not know who he was. But there's one person who does know Mark Martin, and it turns out it's, was it Flag Flying Sam Alito? It was
Flag Sam Alito.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we turn to our favorite far right theocratic justice, I want to just pause.
Could you be more specific, Alex?
Yes.
There are so many to choose from.
Collect all six.
Elise, I just want to sort of like unpack a little bit of what you're talking about, because I think this issue of these lawyers, who have an obligation to the Constitution, to the courts as officers of the court. And particularly somebody who used to serve as a state Supreme Court justice, I think it really connects to what's happening with the justices themselves and the degradation of the justice system, the degradation of the rule of law by these corrupt actors that occupy these seats in the Supreme Court and the lower courts. I was actually on a legal team that brought some of the first civil charges. We brought a civil suit using state tort claims in Wisconsin against the fraudulent electors in Wisconsin, the fake slate of electors. And I remember the conversations we had about, looping in the lawyers because, folks might know about Ken Cheesebro and Jim Trupis, some of these lawyers who were, really sort of using these electors as pawns. And, I think on some level, there's a reluctance to bring a lawsuit against another lawyer or to bring charges or criticize justices of the court because they wear robes or because they're in the profession or whatever. But I think we need to get past that, because these guys are acting criminally. And, following that successful civil suit, Cheesebro was indicted. He was indicted in Georgia. And so I think we need to really get comfortable with understanding that people that, have this veneer, have this air of authority, of legitimacy, can play, not only really dangerous roles, but leading roles in these anti-democratic schemes.
Is court accountability action also behind or involved with the advertising that's happening now to remind lawyers that they are bar members and members of the and court officers, and they shouldn't be sacrificing the integrity of their position just to follow Trump down a rabbit hole and lose their bar license? There's a big ad campaign going on right now. Are you involved with that?
We are not involved with that, but we'll give it lots of props. That's exactly the kind of thing we need to do. I mean, both as a deterrent reminder to folks that might be considering participating in these types of schemes, and as a kind of notice to really put these folks on notice that you can't get away with this stuff. And I think one of the inflection points that we're facing with the potential of a Trump Project 2025 regime that could take power is that type of behavior will be normalized, that they'll really start to weaponize justice in the way that this MAGA faction has been doing.
I mean, just on one thing, I was doing some hot takes before and getting back into the 165 pages of the filing with Jack Smith. And Eric Hirschman has always been a favorite character of mine in this cast of characters for many reasons. He's a true New Yorker. I knew the firm that he came out of, the Kazowitz firm. And I'd forgotten the clips, but I ran them in my hot take, where thank God, Pat Cipollone, Pat Philbin, and Eric Hirschman did their civic duty and what they were sworn to do as lawyers and stood up to power and were at least the last firewall, where Eric Hirschman, in a conversation, as we remember, with John Eastman, that mad scientist of a half-baked constitutional scholar that Donald Trump latched onto, along with Ken Chesborough and Peter Navarro with the whole fake elector scheme. And he's got like this hyperactive John Eastman on the phone. And Hirschman, who's listed in the new filing by Jack Smith as being, his mission, his job description every day was to update Donald Trump on the bullshit fraud schemes, and telling him, sorry, boss, still haven't found it. No outcome determinative fraud here, which is great from a mens rea criminal mind assessment. But Hirschman relays the Jan 6 committee and, of course, to Jack Smith, and it's in this new filing that Eastman calls him up and says, "Oh, you got to buy me more time. We're going to file this case in Georgia and a lawsuit." And he said, "Repeat after me. Peaceful." I don't want to hear anything else out of your effing mouth except for the words "peaceful transfer of power." Repeat. And he made him repeat it. Say it. Yeah. Peaceful transfer of power. He says, "Now let me give you the best advice you're ever going to get, John. Go get yourself an effing really great criminal defense lawyer, because you're going to need it." Now, Thank God Eric Hirschman and others were in there to push back against, that crazy unhinged meeting in December, where the Overstock, or I call him Overthrow.com guy, was there with Sidney Powell, Team Crazy Captain. And if it wasn't for, and drafting executive orders to seize voting machines, if it wasn't for Pat Cipollone running in and looking around the room, he made it sound like it was the bar scene from Star Wars. What are you doing here? Pat, what's his name? Like, what you're writing executive orders to seize voting machines? Yeah. But what if in the next term, I guess my point is, in the next term, there won't be those people there. Nope. Because this shadow government that's sitting in these institutes, this Heritage Foundation, all these other places, they're ready to be swept back into power. They don't give a shit about Donald Trump. He's just the conduit for their evil doing.
That's exactly right. And you see Stephen Miller bragging about how they're going to screen lawyers to make sure they've got the right ones in the room, which means no one who would stand up against this lawlessness, this criminality. It's terrifying to think that those people who are so unfit for any position of public trust feel so emboldened and so public about it, in essence, so arrogant that they think that they have the right to basically trample all over our laws. And there was one thing I wanted to flag from what we were talking about before, which is on Jim Trupis, the Wisconsin lawyer. It's not just that Trupis was involved in this scheme and that there were others in Wisconsin involved in this scheme to create this fake slate of electors. And it's not just that Jenny Thomas was, writing emails urging them to do so. I looked at the filings, and Jim Trupis was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in this period while he was giving this terrible advice. So he got richer doing it too.
How about the, Alex, I don't mean to cut you off, but I get excited, especially when Lisa's talking about that. How about the now infamous meeting where the Jan 6th idea was placed in Donald Trump's head because Rance Priebus told them, don't give him any hope. Don't tell Donald Trump he can win this. And Ken Chesbro tells him that Jan 6th is really the red letter day, right? And then when it happens, there's the text messages or emails between Troupis and Chesbro. He says, I think we have a little insight into what's going on now on Jan 6th, don't we? Yeah. Asshole, pardon me. You gave him the idea.
Did you say asshole AF?
No, I think that might have to bleep that out. I mean, I want to stay on YouTube.
Jerk AF.
Right.
No, but I mean the Chesbro exchange with Troupis is stunning. And it's also the case that what you have is, this whole series of events where Trump is then tweeting, it will, come to DC on January 6th. It will be wild. It puts this whole thing in play in order to actually have this crowd, march on the Capitol, presumably to take violent action, because we know from, I think it was Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, that when his Trump's people were not getting into the inner circle at the ellipse to hear Trump speak, he was enraged that they were having to go through the magnetrons, through the metal detectors. And they didn't want to go through because they had guns and other weapons. And Trump apparently says, well, they're not after me. Like, I'm safe. He knew that they had weapons. He knew, and he wanted them anyway.
Right. They're homicidal armed maniacs, but they're my homicidal armed maniacs.
Yeah. It's just extraordinary. And then of course you have other characters in this whole scenario, like, the representative from Georgia who, before she's even sworn in, basically is part of this scheme and is seeking a pardon. Marjorie Taylor Greene seeking a pardon basically before she even becomes a member of Congress for her role in this outrageous scheme. And then the other part is part of that exchange, I think it was with Eastman and one of the other guys, is they basically thought they had one or two Supreme Court justices who were willing to help them intervene. There's a conversation in which they're basically saying, and I presume, of course, just to speculate, that it's Alito and Thomas. I don't think that would be wild speculation, but they in essence are saying that they have some justices who might help step in and help stop that vote from being counted. It didn't happen, but we came this close to disaster on so many fronts that it's a miracle that our democracy survived all those machinations.
So, Lisa, if you were a Supreme Court justice and sort of like, seeing all this unfold, and then the cases, around these challenges to the election outcomes, this cooked up scheme, we're coming up to the Supreme Court, wouldn't it be a natural thing to do to go outside to your flagpole and take the American flag and flip it upside down and lift it back up? Oh, no, that was his wife.
Who hasn't done that?
Yeah.
So getting back to our hook here, could you tell us about Alito's relationship with this insurrectionary law school dean? What do we know about that?
Yeah, so the first story in The Intercept from this week from Sean Musgrave is about Dean Mark Martin, who was the dean for a period at Regent University Law School, which is the law school that was created by Pat Robertson to basically teach biblical law. For, I think at the beginning, they used to have a Bible on the corner of every desk while they were teaching business law. I know this because just this past year in Wisconsin, there was a Regent Law grad who ran for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, backed by millions of dollars by another billionaire, Dick Uihlein, who got richer during the pandemic because he sells boxes. And Regent University Law School is, barely got accredited years ago. And here we have a Supreme Court Justice Alito who's, gave a commencement address there about a decade ago, and then starts teaching there this Supreme Court constitutional law sort of seminar for Regent Law students with, not solo, not just that, Sam Alito can't conduct a lecture himself. He has to do it with who? Mark Martin. Mark Martin, who said basically this was the highlight of his career, to be teaching this class with a sitting Supreme Court justice. And he taught the first class that we know of was right after the insurrection. So basically just weeks after the insurrectionist flag, it might even have been, the details come down as the flag is flying, but basically after January 6th, after Alito's house had the flag flown upside down over it. Then there is Sam Alito teaching a class with one of the leaders of the insurrection on the Constitution of the United States. The next year, he does it again. So more news comes out about what happened on January 6th. There's more breadcrumbs about Mark Martin. Again, Alito's back up the next year, teaching this class with Mark Martin at Regent. The year after that, as you mentioned, Alex, Mark Martin creates this High Point University Law School in North Carolina. So he's the head of that operation. And again, Alito's teaching with this guy. And so you have a sitting Supreme Court justice who has already basically signaled his side. And then in his interview that he didn't know about, but basically the undercover audio that Lauren Windsor had with Sam Alito just this summer at the Supreme Court Historical Society, he basically says, there are sides and one side's going to win. Well, he's put his thumb on the scale of which side is going to win. Sam Alito has. And so here he is basically hanging out with one of the leaders of the behind the scenes effort to subvert the American election. And he didn't recuse himself from any of those January 6 cases, not one of them. In fact, he was poised to write the decision in the immunity case. And then there's a little factoid that struck me as well, which is I think that he ended up disclosing on his financial disclosure forms that he was paid $9,500 for this 3-hour con law seminar. Hey, that's pretty good pay if you can get it. $3,000 an hour to teach a class with an insurrectionist. That's a pretty penny.
I got a question for Lisa and Alex. Do you think, as we all would, whether it was for Uber Eats or for when he met with Mark Martin, he used the flagpole as an identifier for his house? Hey, just come down. It's easy to find my house. I have a giant flagpole next to the driveway and it's upside down. Insurrectionist flag. Okay, I found it.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't have a castle like owned by a German princess.
A moat.
He has to go to Germany.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. So this will go on. It'll just go on in different takes and different hot takes in different ways and shapes and forms. This new collaboration of Legal AF MTN and Court Accountability Action. You're seeing the two leaders of it, leaders of its investigative research group, and Lisa Graves and True North, and also a fellow podcaster with a great new podcast, really great, called Grave and Justice. Great name, too. And Alex Aronson, the founder of it, who sort of said, enough is enough. We need an organization that's going to shine a light and make it transparent about what they're doing, and then giving our audience the ability to, once you understand the knowledge is power, we're here to also guide you into things you can do about it. We're not just the Grim Reapers, like, oh, here the sky is falling, nothing we can do about it. No, there's ways to protect our constitutional republic and our democracy. And as Lisa said earlier, and as Jamie Raskin said, we almost accidentally toppled our constitutional republic. Ben Franklin would be like, I told you if you could keep it. And right now, I'm having some grave doubts about whether that's going to happen. But we'll continue to follow it on Legal AF MTN. If you like this kind of programming, if you like this kind of show, and you like CAA, you're going to love being on Legal AF MTN. Free subscribe, bring us up to 200,000 before the end of the month. We have other exclusive content. We got a new show, which will fit right in with the content providers right here, the contributors right here. It's called Unprecedented, where once a week we're going to sit at that Supreme Court. We're going to talk about everything upside down, inside out, left and right. The new leaks. I never had a Supreme Court that leaked before. This one likes to leak. It's like it's like a Super Bowl event. We get a leak every week, and we're going to talk about ethical violations that I'm sure that are going to happen, and what's going to happen on the court, cases they take, cases they don't take, the oral arguments, the decisions, and of course, they come up with about 60 or 70 decisions a year. They've only got 26 cases so far on the docket. But you can tell how they're going to fill the back end of their docket into the 25 season, if you will, with a lot of cases about elections and Donald Trump all over again, as no doubt they put their big fat fingers on the scales of justice. And we'll follow it right here on Legal AF MTN. And you can be assured that Lisa and Alex will do the same things. Guys, we have your commitment. You're here regularly now, right?
Yes.
You got it. Thanks for having us.
We're really thrilled. So until our all next content on Legal AF MTN, Free subscribe right now. Help us get to that big number. This is Michael Popok, Lisa Graves, Alex Aronson signing off. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.